And for the very basic, for the HIP office, you can access it by going to the Home Inspector Pro website, which is homeinspectorpro.com. And you can go to office/cloud and go to HIP office login, or you can go to office.homeinspectorpro.com, and that will take you to the login screen. Either one is going to work. If you're already logged into the Home Inspector Pro website, it will just take you in automatically under your username. Otherwise, it'll prompt you for your Home Inspector Pro username and password. And this is the same username and password that's used for the desktop, mobile, website, and Office. So the first time you come in here, it may ask you to go through a wizard that prompts for some basic information, such as your address, where you're located, the currencies to use, your time zone, that type of stuff. You just need to do that one time, and that's some basics for the company. I've already done that on mine, so it just comes to the dashboard. The dashboard shows you some overall information for the company, with your number of orders and the weather and just basic information. And this gives you an overview of the information.
Don't say that, Matt.
Okay, so everything we're going to be covering is going to be under the settings menu on the left-hand side. And the primary stuff we're going to be covering is these first three items. So scheduling parameters, services, and fee structure. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is services. And the services makes note of what services your company offers. There are a list of services that are listed here already. And you'll see it has a service name and a description. And the description explains exactly what is covered in the service. The thing to look at is on the far right-hand side, there's a column for primary and add-ons. Any service can be a combination of a primary, add-on, both, and in theory, neither. A primary service is a service that is offered standalone without any additional services required. So commonly that'd be like your residential inspection, commercial, and you may have add-on services that you also offer just as standalone services. Like some people offer sewer scope where they just offer that as a standalone service. There's also the column for add-ons. And an add-on services is something that can be added on to a primary service. So it's an ancillary service that you offer in addition to whatever primary service you're offering. Often you'll have primary services that are never done as add-ons, such as residential inspections. They're always the primary service. You may have some where they are always a ancillary service, like thermal inspections, where it is always an add-on to like a residential inspection or a commercial. And you can have them that are both, where you do it both standalone and as an add-on value. You can add a new service by clicking on the new service button. And this allows you to add in the service name and description and specify whether it's a primary, add-on, or both. You do have to enter in the description in addition to the service name. Now, if you have services here that just come with the program that you are not going to be offering, you can click on the trash can icon on the far right-hand side to remove that service so it's no longer listed here. And you can always add it on later if you'd like. You can also click on the pad with paper looking icon and modify your descriptions or what combination of primary and add-on they are. Okay. The next thing we'll take a look at is the fee structure. And the fee structure is basically for telling the system how much does it cost for various services that we offer under different conditions. Within this section, keep in mind is that the services that are offered here, we're putting in fees, and we'll also do the same thing for the scheduling services. These are intended as generalizations. There are always going to be exceptions to what you charge and how long it takes to do inspections. And you can always override those. But this sets, especially for when customers are scheduling through the website scheduler or the embedded scheduler, how the system knows to automatically schedule inspections. It needs to know generally what do you charge and generally how long does it take to do an inspection. You can always override those after the fact. This is also when you go to create an order, you're going to be entering in values such as or pulling values from a third-party source for things like the square footage, the age, things like that. You can always override those as well. There are situations where you may have a 80-year-old house that's in perfect condition, and you can see that from the road that it generally doesn't have a ton of problems, or it looks like it's generally fine. You may reduce the fee if you charge for age, whereas you may have a 10-year-old house that is just a complete mess. So there's going to be variations that you as inspectors will have the expertise to judge from the corner, and this is going to take longer, or it's going to take more time, so we're going to charge more. At the top, there's the service dropdown, and the service dropdown allows us to specify what are the fees for this given service. Now, throughout the Home Inspector Pro Office program, in addition to the services that you specified, you'll also have one that is titled default. And the idea behind that is if you have not specified a value, say, for example, for termite inspections, you haven't specified like a maximum size and the cost for it, it's going to then revert back to the fee schedule that's defined for the default service. This way, the system is able to schedule or price something even if you haven't explicitly entered in a value. Generally, we recommend you be explicit about the fees and scheduling that you put in. That way you're able to be more exact and have less ambiguity about what you charge and the amount of time it takes to do things. But the default is a good fallback just in case. So we're going to look at the residential inspection as an example. You'll notice those are all primary services because you set the fees based on the primary service, and then you are able to say what the ancillary services cost in addition to that. So at the top, we're able to specify the maximum size for automatic pricing. And this is based on your fee schedule, what the largest property that you have a fixed schedule for. Again, you can override this. This is just what happens if somebody is going through the web-based scheduler, that it knows what to handle. If somebody, for example, I have mine set to 6,500. If somebody were to go on and start scheduling online, and the property is for a 10,000 square foot house, it's just going to recommend the customer contact you, and it uses the company email address and company phone number for them to contact to get a custom quote. But if it falls within the range that you specify that value here. And then below that, you're able to specify different ranges of prices based on different sizes. So I already have mine in here, but say, for example, from 1 square foot to, and I'm going to drop this down to 2,000, you'll see it updates the slider there, and it also updates the next slider below that. How much do we charge? And so keep in mind you have the options here for per square foot and overall. Make sure you specify whether it's per square foot or overall, because we've had people intending for it to be an overall price, and they select per square foot, and then they complain is like the inspections are coming up for $20,000. It's like, well, $300 per square foot is going to be very pricey for a 2,000 square foot house. So I have overall, it's going to be $375. And then you're able to specify each of the succeeding ranges that are going to be here. And you can get as granular as you want to. Most inspectors have some sort of fee schedule they've already set up, but you can recreate that exactly as you have it in your fixed range. And it just goes continually down until you hit the maximum value. So in this case, 6,500 square foot. If you want to remove a line and consolidate your schedule, you can remove that entry. And then it's just going to extend that after the maximum. If your range is outside of the maximum, you're going to have the option to add in a new line until you complete up to the maximum. So it allows you to get very granular about the size of the schedule. So then you can hit save. So save my changes. So then on the left-hand side, the next is the distance. And so this is for how far you're going to be traveling for a given inspection, what you're going to be charging. And again, you can override this, and you could have an inspection that's 100 miles away. the system you use, you want to specify the maximum that you want to have it automatically scheduled. So I have it set for a maximum distance of 60. Keep in mind that this is if you were to look at your service area as a circle around your area, this is the radius of how far you're going to be going out. So it's from the center point out to that distance. It's not the total diameter or the total width of your service area. So if your service area is 60 miles, then you would set the maximum distance for travel probably at 30, because it's usually half of whatever your total width of your service area. I have mine set really high, so this will cover a service area that's 120 miles wide. You're then able to specify, just like with the size, different ranges for what you're charging. So if it's within 1 to 30 miles, I'm going to charge, I don't charge anything for within that service area. So you can set the value as 0. And it's not going to charge for any properties that are scheduled within that 30 miles from my starting point. For the second block from 31 to 50, I'm going to be charging 25 cents a mile. And so I'm specifying 0.25. You could also specify an overall value. And then anything that's between 51 miles and 60, just charge a flat rate of $50. So the thing to keep in mind with this is not breaking down that between miles 1 and 30, there's no cost. And then for miles 31 through 50, it's a quarter a mile. This is saying if, say, the property was 50 miles out, it's going to charge 0.25 or a quarter for every mile within 0 to 50. So I think it works out to $12.50 is what that would be. Math. But so it's not charging in gradations and breaking down for each portion. It's if they fall within this range, the entire distance is going to be calculated for that. And if you don't charge for distance, you can just add this in. And you do want to set a value here, but just set the entire range and set the value to 0. That way it just won't charge, but it still has that that overall maximum distance set, because this distance is also used for the fee schedule. So we want to make sure we have the maximum distance set. If you don't want to include any reference to this on the invoice, you want to just have this rolled into the inspection cost, you can check to hide this information from the client and just roll it into the primary service. Some people want to have it on there, some people don't. It's up to you. We make sure to hit save at the bottom. And then we have age of property. And just like the distance, we set the maximum age that we're going to set for automatic pricing. And you know your service area and generally how old homes are going to be in that area. I'm in Washington State. Our houses generally max out at about, well, now about 130 years. But that's on the very far end. Whereas on the East Coast, you may have places that it's not uncommon to come across houses that are 150 years old. So you would want to just specify the maximum that you want to have the system automatically calculate the pricing, just like the size. And of course, you can always override this when you're putting in the pricing schedule if you're doing it entering it in manually. And just like the distance, you specify a range. So maybe 0 through 40-year-old homes, you just don't charge anything for those. So you set the overall to 0. And then you set the scales for whether per year or an overall price up to the maximum of what you set. Interesting. Price doesn't have the option to hide the age there as well. Okay, next one is the add-on services. And so this is how much you're charging for an add-on service in addition to the primary service. So for a residential inspection, these are all my add-on services I have defined, all the services that are explicitly marked as add-on. So I can then set per square foot or overall, how much do I charge for that add-on service? If you have services that you have as add-ons that you don't charge for, then you would just set the overall as 0. But you can set a per square foot value if you're going to be charging per square foot as well. And we have our discounts and other fees. And so this is how you're able to add on or deduct values from the calculated prices as they come in. Keep in mind that the values you set here are across the board. They are not on a per inspection basis. If you say, for example, give a percentage discount for add-on services, like sometimes people will give like 10% off for any of their add-on services if scheduled with a primary service. This is going to be for all add-on services, not a specific service. We have this on the list of features to add in the future to make this more granular, but currently it is across the board for all add-on services. And this is done just on a percentage basis. But you can do a percentage off of the primary service, the distance, age, and so on. And you can also reduce the overall amount by a fixed value. Then you have your other fees and discounts, and this is an additional fee that you add on top of the price. So the discounts that are shown at the top are a lesser amount to reduce the amount. The fees are to increase the amount. So some people, if they are charging credit cards and they don't want to roll their credit card, they don't want to have a granular credit card fee on the invoice, they'll just charge a convenience fee that's a fixed amount. You could also do this as a percentage. So you could do either say like $5 as a convenience fee, or you could do like 3%, where it's taking 3% value of the overall amount and adding on 3% as a separate line item. And the fee title that you list here is going to show on the invoice unless you have marked it to be hidden. Especially if you're increasing prices like that, it's usually a good idea to make it very granular. And I think some state laws require you to be very transparent about adding those, having those fees broken out. The same thing if you're charging sales tax or required to charge sales tax in your state, you could have put in the percentage that it's going to be charging there. And you can add in any number of items there for your fees. So, are there any questions about the fee structure? Okay.
I had one question. This
Sure.
services, we have a ton of services. Does it matter how many we have? Does that affect the system? Does it drag it down?
No, we haven't seen any indications, and we've had companies that they have a lot of variations in their services because they have different. The one example that I can think of is we had a company that had, I think, like 8 different residential services because they had different categories. And so they ended up having 8 regular inspection services, and then they had like a half dozen add-on services, and there was no indications of any problems. How many services do you offer?
Bobby, how do you think that's in there? 75, maybe?
Yeah, there's a ton of them. Now, maybe we can, narrow that down, but there's a lot.
What differentiates between those services? I can't even think of 75 possible services you could offer.
Well, we break down by 500 square foot increments. So there's several. Then you've got multi-unit, then you got commercial.
Okay, so the size would, and that's where the size breakdown ends up solving part of that. So you wouldn't have to have separate services for each of those. The multi-unit you'd probably want to have individual services for like a duplex, triplex, quadplex, and we had discussion about how to handle that, because the same thing happens when people are inspecting apartment complexes where it could be any number and it's not necessarily per square footage, it's per unit. So I know that is in discussion about how to handle that, is just by doing a quantity for the services. But so that's something that's in process.
Well, then we've got well and septic. So then you've got, well with septic, well without septic, well and septic with a home inspection, well and septic without a home inspection. And there's a million variables.
Okay. And so that's probably something where we'd want to go through and actually walk through that with you guys to see what the options are. Because with that many variations, some of those would be redundant because it would be based on add-ons versus primaries.
Yeah.
So we'd want to walk through that with you.
Okay.
Let's go to scheduling parameters. And so the scheduling parameters is going to be based, this is how the system knows how long it takes to do schedules and or do inspections and how to schedule those. So if you're in HIP office version, okay. So for HIP office version 2, I'd actually need to look at this. This is for the inspector address. This is going to be per inspector because every inspector is located somewhere else. Though I believe there's an option to specify that everybody's going to be working from the same home base. I'd have to double check that. In version 1, this is just the base of where the inspector starts. But you would be specifying where the inspector is normally going to be starting on a day-to-day basis. And this is what's set up when you do the initial sign-on of HIP office as part of the wizard. You could always update this later on as well, just by entering in the address. And it this pulls from the Google Maps address system and then populates the address values below. For the working hours, this is a framework for generally what are the working hours that the inspector is going to be available. So if on in general, on a day-to-day basis, the inspector works, say, Monday through Saturday, generally from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. You don't need to get granular on for what are going to be the variations in the scheduling. This is just generally setting the framework for what they're available. So at the top, you specify their start time. So in this case, it would be 8 a.m. And then their end time normally is going to be 6 p.m. You're then able to set the working hours, and you'll see it populates all the checkboxes below for the general hours that the inspector is working on a given day. And so most people, it's going to be just setting that fixed hours. If they have a defined unavailable point throughout the week that is constant, you can unselect those days. Say, for example, the inspector is just not going to be available from noon to 2 every day of the week. You could uncheck noon to 2 each of those checkboxes and make them not available. But this is just a general framework of when they're available. Once you have that specified, and most people are going to have this just as a fixed, like 8 to 6 or 7 to 5, whatever it is, you can then click on reset all days. And you'll see that that updates the day schedule below with those same checkboxes, but for the 7 days of the week. So if the inspector is always going to be working just Monday through Saturday and will not be working on Sunday, you can click in the top circle directly underneath Sunday to select all and then unselect. And this makes it so that the inspector will not be available on Sundays at all. If the inspector generally will not be, will be maybe starting an hour later on Saturdays, you could then uncheck the 8 o'clock to 8:30 and 8:30 to 9. And maybe they're going to be finishing up. They'll always be finishing up an hour early on Saturday as well. You could take off 5 and 5:30. And this way, this tells the system generally what is the block available time that the inspector will be available on a week-to-week basis. And so we can hit update all time slots, and that updates the time slots in the system. You can always come back and change this once there is a schedule in place and there are orders tied to those scheduled items. You won't be able to unselect those if there are orders that are tied to them. So you may see that some of these, and I can't tell if you can really tell from your end, but some of these checkboxes are grayed out because there are orders scheduled for the inspector for that given time slot. So you can't change it after the fact if there are current orders in place. You can change it if there are no orders in place, but once they're on the books, you can't change it out from underneath those orders. You need to modify those orders first, and then you can come back and correct those. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over scheduling structure for a minute, and we're going to go to scheduling hours. And so the scheduling hours then takes into account the working hours that we specified. And this is where you're able to specify the blocks of time that the inspector is able to be scheduled. So these are the actual time slots that are available for the inspector to be scheduled on a given day. And so if the inspector is available, maybe for 2 inspections a day or 3 inspections a day, you would specify the time ranges that they would be available. And these could be any width of blocks as would be appropriate. And based on the length of the average length of your inspections, you may have some inspections that you're going to have a longer window. Say, for example, the afternoon block, you may have like a 3 or 4 hour window, whereas the morning block may be 2 2-hour blocks or some variation. But you're able to go through and add in time slots and specify what times are available. You may go very broad and say the inspector is going to only have 2 inspections per day, and you could have like 8 to 12. So there's a 4-hour block, and then 12 to 6, there's a 6-hour block. And those are going to be the overall blocks that are available on a day-to-day basis. They would be able to get a maximum of 2 inspections in that day. Otherwise, if you wanted to have variations, you could try to make them more narrow. And just keep in mind is that the narrower the inspection windows, the harder it is for the system to be able to fill those in within those time frames. And keep in mind is also that these time frames take into account the driving distance. So if the inspector is going to be, if it's going to take 45 minutes for the inspector to travel, is not just the time of inspection, but also the time of travel to get to the inspection. So it does take a little trial and error to see what works for best for the schedule. But you should be able to, you can tweak this as you go on, and you don't have, this is one of those systems where, unlike the working hours where once there's something associated, like an actual order associated with the working hours, you can change these blocks even if there are orders associated, because this affects the scheduling of putting in there versus not having the inspector working at that time. And again, just like with the scheduling parameters and the fee parameters, you're also able to override this. So if as the office person, if you are scheduling somebody for an inspection and it's going to be, it ends up estimating it's going to be 5-hour inspection, or you could schedule somebody for like 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It's going to tell you that's outside their working hours, but you can force it because this is just a general guideline. And this is also what's used for the automatic scheduler. So you don't have customers able to specify a time outside your hours, but you as the office person can put them whenever you want. The intent is just for automatic scheduling. So once you add the scheduling time slots in, so I'm going to go ahead and add in, so 8 a.m. to 11, so a.m. So there's a 3-hour block available there. Then I have 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So they have another 3-hour block. And then 2 to 4 is going to, and 2 to 6 is going to end up being a 4-hour block. So it gives them the availability to have 3 slots for the day with a longer one at the end of the day. If you have a designated time for your inspectors to be taking a lunch break during the day, you can put that into the calculation here and just leave a gap for when they're going to be doing their inspections. Say, for example, they're actually going to start at 11:30 because they have a half-hour gap in there. Some inspectors just eat while they're working, while they're driving, or during the course of, they fit it in basically, and you don't have to leave the gap in there. But if you want, you can have a designated time that they're available. And then you can see a representation of how this is going to look for the given inspector. You can refresh the calendar. There we go. And you can click for a given day. It's going to show the blocking. So these are the blocks that are visible for a given day on the calendar. It'll show what this is. So any questions on the scheduling hours for the blocks?
And I
I've
have
got-
one
Go ahead.
whenever you get a chance.
No, go for it.
The Google Sync, when is that feature going to be working?
I would need to check. I know there was discussion of it yesterday of what is required to get that finished, because it hasn't been working, and they've been trying to get that working, but it's been a permissions issue with Google, and so they're supposed to be getting that fixed anytime. But I'll have to check for the specific timeline, and I can follow up with you on that.
Okay, because I have all my just appointments and so on for that, so I didn't want to go live yet until that was working.
Yeah, understood. And what John's referring to is you have the ability to sync, have the inspector's calendar. If you go to the profile, and I'd have to look where it is in version 2, under the account settings, you have the ability to sync their Google Calendar, which by extension works with their iCal, so that if they have their personal calendar can be used for scheduling as well. So it doesn't show the inspector's personal information. It just shows items that are blocked by busy items that are on their calendar. And that way they have it visible on their schedule to keep them from being scheduled when they're marked as busy. And we're supposed to, I think what they're working on is making it so it's two-way, so that the schedule for the inspector is pushed to their personal calendar, so they don't schedule personal stuff when they're scheduled for inspections, and vice versa. Right now it's one way only, but that is in the process right now. And John, I could follow up with you after with what the developers say about that.
Much appreciated.
The question I was going to ask was, because we have multiple inspectors, and I realize this may not be the same one that ours will look like, but we want to be careful about people requesting certain inspectors, because although they sometimes will, you could end up with one person getting all the work and nobody else. So I assume there's going to be a way that they can't see who they're requesting. They're just putting a generic request in.
Correct, and that's a setting within the HEP Office version 2 is to whether there's the ability to specify an inspector or just have it blind blocking, where it just says an inspection for a given time, regardless of who the inspector is.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And in most cases for that is if they are looking for a specific inspector, they would be contacting the office directly versus going through the online scheduler, because they would want to make sure that they're getting that person. But that's something that is specific for version 2. So we'll go back to the scheduling structure. And like the fee structure, this specifies how the system is able to know how long it takes to do an inspection for a given size of property. So I'm going to go ahead and select the service. And again, this has the default service to fall back to, but we're going to be looking at residential inspection. And so for the residential inspection, we have the maximum size, and this value actually comes from the fee structure. So that's where it got the value for the maximum size. So they're the same. And then you're specifying different ranges of property size. How long does it take in general to do an inspection? And this is something that really depends upon your past history of inspections and the knowledge of how long it takes to do various inspections. But this is just intended as a ballpark. Because obviously a property of a given size, the cost and the amount of time it takes can vary wildly depending on the conditions, in addition to just the size, but also the age, the distance, all of those type of things. But you're able to specify. So generally, when you're doing a 1 to 1,500 square foot, how long does it take to do an inspection? Say, hour and 15 minutes. 1,500 to 2,000 takes an hour and 30 minutes. And you can always, and then it ramps up. And most people get relatively granular and just break it out into like 500 or 1,000 foot increments, because it usually scales linearly. Can't speak. Up to the maximum size. And this can also vary depending on time of year. Doing an inspection in the summer may not take as long as it takes in the winter. Like if you're in Michigan where there's a ton of snow, it may take longer. And so what some people will do is as the seasons change, they will come in and adjust these time frames, because they know generally it takes about 20-30 minutes longer in the winter versus the summer. they'll come in and they'll just adjust these schedules. There's nothing that is tied directly to this. It's just used dynamically when the customers are actually scheduling. It uses these values as they're going. So you can always come back and adjust these as needed. So then we're going to go to the distance. And again, the distance comes from the fee structure. And you're able to say for a given distance, how long does it generally take to travel that distance? And this is something that really depends on the on-the-ground conditions in your area. If generally if most things for the travel for the inspector is local, it's going to take they'll probably be going like 30 miles an hour or 35 miles an hour, and you want to count in for other things that may cause problems. Like if I've been in areas where there's, like in Texas, where or in Minnesota, is like you go any number of distance, there are no stop signs, or there are very few stop signs because everything is pretty much straight shots. Whereas where I live, there are stop signs all over the place, or in a very heavily residential area. So you know it's going to be taking longer just generally to go a short distance versus in those areas where you can go a longer distance because the speed limit is higher and there's less stops. So that's going to be something that's very much on the ground where you are that's going to affect the time. And so you can do per mile or overall. If you have the distance range, doing overall is harder because it's obvious, and it's just the nature of travel is it's going to take a different amount of time to travel 20 miles versus 40 miles. And that's where the per mile can be helpful. And this is just calculating it out basically. 30 miles an hour is going to be 2 minutes per mile. Whereas if you're on the freeway, it's going to be, you may be doing 60 on average. So it'd be 1 minute per mile. One thing to keep in mind, just like the fee structure, is this is how it calculates for the total distance, not the portion of distance of travel. So if you're for the first 10 miles, it's not going to be 30 miles an hour, and then 11 miles and beyond, it's going to be 60 miles an hour. This is total for that overall distance. And so you want to average those amounts out. If most of your, and this is something where you look at your past inspections, if most of your inspections are in the 50 mile range or like 40 mile range, then ballpark out the distance and time of travel for any of the inspections in that range. This is not meant to be exact. This is just meant to be a granular ballparking of the amount of time, because any number of things can affect the time of distance. Same thing with the what I mentioned about the seasons. One is that travel may vary depending on the weather conditions that are common during that season. The other thing is what are the conditions for a given time. Some people will go through, especially if they're in a suburban residential area and that's their entire service area, they will change their travel times in the summer from the rest of the year because they're not behind school buses during most of the day. And so you want to kind of average that out. Whereas if they're not they're not getting stuck behind school buses all the time, they could shave some time off on the distance of the time traveled. Also, if you're unsure of the travel time, depending on your state and local departments of transportation, some departments of transportation provide very good average travel times throughout the year, and they will provide historical travel times. So you can ballpark, especially for highways, how long it takes to go a given distance in a given area. The other thing you can do is you could take past inspection addresses, say, take a dozen inspections over the last like 6 months, and you could do a spot check using Google Maps and see what the average travel time is from the inspector's location to that property. And that way, if they're spread over a given area, that would give you a ballpark average of how long does an average take to go to these places. That can give you a good idea for how to put that in. But again, these are all just generalized averages. Next is the add-on services. And so this is the amount of time it takes to perform a given add-on service in addition to a primary service. So for a residential inspection, you can choose whether to do per square foot or overall. How long does it take to do that service? So when you're doing a residential inspection, it might add 1 hour. And so you can put 1 and 0. For a mold inspection, it same thing. It may be overall, so we put in 0 and 30. Some of yours may be per square foot. So like a thermal inspection may be, it's going to take an average of a minute per square foot. And so if it's a 2,000 square foot, this makes sense. That may be something where you put a quarter of a minute for in there, because 1 minute per square foot on a 2,000 square foot house would be like a day and a half. So but otherwise you can do the sewer scope as well, so maybe it just adds 45 minutes, so 0 45. It is on the list of features to add in is the ability to specify per instance. So for things like mold and radon, where you would be doing individual samples, adding in the ability to just put in a quantity of time or time per quantity versus and the per square footage. That is on the list of things to do. Oh, I left the time blank. Okay. The one other thing to take a look at is on the inspectors themselves. There is a calendar / schedule, and as John mentioned, there is you're able to see a calendar under the orders view for the inspector, and this actually shows for the orders they are scheduled for, as well as any entries that have been added in to block off for them. It will give a calendar and timetable for them. When the Google Calendar sync is enabled, it will also have any scheduled items that are marked as busy from their calendar will be shown on this calendar, so it blocks off any times. You can also, as the office person, go in and actually tap on any given day and mark people as time off. So especially if like you have a office, in-office training time or things like that, you're able to go in and block off days so that inspector isn't scheduled during those periods. And those will be reflected on the left-hand side here. And also for the online scheduler, we'll block them off. But if the Google Calendar sync is, those could be done either in this section and block them off in the HIP office side, or they could be scheduled in the calendar side, and it will block for the calendar for them to be scheduled. So. Okay, so that about does it for today. Were there any questions?
I have one. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, go for it.
Just in regards to when you cancel that, is that where that system HIP office is going to send out the notification to the client saying it's canceled?
Oh, for the inspection being canceled?
Yeah.
That would be done on the actual order. So if we were to go to the order section and view orders, you would actually cancel the order here, and you would mark it as cancel and on the given order, and that's where it would remove it from the schedule, as well as sending the notification.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bobby or Andrea? You guys have questions?
I don't think I do right now. I mean, until we really start messing with it, then I'm sure there'll be some.
Okay.
Same here. I'm just trying to think of the whole process, but it might come later. The questions might come later.
Okay. Well, if you do have any questions, let me know, and I can send you all the link to the video as well once it's complete, once it finishes uploading. So,
yeah, that'd be very helpful. I'm sure we'll want to refer to that.
Okay, sounds good. Well, have a good day.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Bye.